Good afternoon, it's time for the lunchtime news on BBC One with Tanya Beckett.
Nurses on the picket line as they strike for more pay. Intensive care and cancer services are affected for the first time, with up to half of health trusts in England impacted by the strike.
They're selfless people and they're standing up for their patients, for an NHS that's totally broken, but they are the people that's trying to work in that every single day and every single night.
We'll have the latest on the strike. Also on the programme, fleeing Sudan, thousands more seek safety from the fighting in Khartoum as Britain arranges a last flight out later today. First Republic Bank collapses in the US but is immediately bought by JP Morgan Chase. And President Trump arrives in Scotland for a bank holiday break, surveying his golf courses. Hello, good afternoon. Nurses are in the middle of their biggest strike so far this lunchtime, with their union, the RCN, calling on the government to put more money on the table if it wants to end the dispute. About half the health trusts in England are affected by today's strike, which ends at midnight. The walkout is impacting critical services such as intensive care for the first time. The government has insisted it's made a fair and reasonable offer. NHS England has warned that staffing levels in some areas of the country will be exceptionally low. Here's our health correspondent, Catherine Da Costa.
They say cut back, we say fight back.
Back on the picket line in London. For the third time this year, members of the Royal College of Nursing are once again on strike.
No NHS cut.
Today's stoppage affects half of England's NHS trusts. Some Unite members at a handful of hospital trusts and ambulance services are also taking action today and tomorrow. These nurses say they're willing to keep up the pressure for better pay.
I've been a nurse now for 15 years and it's just got worse and worse. The staffing is cut, our pay is cut, but our patient care is always excellent. But we just strive and we give and we get nothing back.
We're on strike because I have seen over my entire career of more than a decade in the NHS a progressive decline in the quality of care that me and my colleagues have been able to provide.
Some national exemptions have been agreed to protect critical areas such as major trauma and intensive care, but some trusts say they're still experiencing significant delays to A&E. The RCN says the only way to mend the health service is to address the staffing crisis.
They're selfless people and they're standing up for their patients, for an NHS that's totally broken, but they are the people that's trying to work in that every single day and every single night, trying to look after their patients. So again, my message to the Secretary of State this morning is, for goodness sake, let's get into a room and sort this out and do the right thing for those nursing staff.
The strike was called earlier this month after RCN members rejected a government offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a one-off payment to top up last year's salary. Members of the Unite union have also rejected the deal. But other unions representing ambulance staff, midwives and physios have accepted the offer.
We will now get together on Tuesday. The NHS Staff Council will meet to vote on whether it accepts the agreement that we negotiated with them. I think it's right to wait for the NHS Staff Council to come to that decision, and I think this strike is premature and is disrespectful to those trade unions that will be meeting on Tuesday.
It's expected the majority of NHS unions will back the deal at that meeting, with ministers having agreed to introduce it if they do.
Catherine joins us now from outside the John Radcliffe Hospital, which is in Oxford. Catherine, other health unions are meeting tomorrow and they have accepted the pay deal, some of them. So they're meeting ministers. Does that leave those striking a little isolated?
Yes, well, the RCN and Unite unions have both very noisy here, as you can hear. Both the RCN and Unite unions have rejected what's on the table in England, and the RCN union has said, regardless of what happens tomorrow at the meeting of health unions, if there's not an improved pay offer for nurses, it intends to reballot its members for another 6-month mandate. Now, it would be a national ballot this time. That could mean it's harder to hit the required threshold. And then there's the junior doctors dispute in England. They won't be at tomorrow's meeting because they're on a different contract. They're calling for a 35% pay rise. Now, that dispute still needs to be resolved, and as yet there's been no formal plans for formal talks with the government.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. The United Nations is sending its top aid official to Sudan to help coordinate relief efforts after warning the humanitarian situation there is reaching breaking point. Fighting continues in the capital, Khartoum, following the failure of the latest ceasefire. Thousands of people continue to try to leave the country. An extra evacuation flight for British nationals from Port Sudan on the Red Sea leaves later today. Those not able to leave there by plane are taking boats across to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, from where Andrew Harding sent the latest.
Disembarking from a huge American transport ship this morning after an overnight voyage from Sudan. On board, Americans, Australians and some British nationals, including a family from Edinburgh. Safe now here in Saudi Arabia after a long journey from Sudan's capital, Khartoum.
Hello, who's this?
This is Noor. She's 3 weeks. She was born on the 4th of April.
Just before the war started?
Yeah.
And what's your name?
Mohammed Kadouk.
And how are you all feeling today?
Exhausted, really tired.
Excited.
Are you excited, are you?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
What's your name?
Omar.
And how was your last week or two? It's been difficult?
Yeah, when every time we go to the airport and they tell us, no, stay home, and then come on, I feel sad because I couldn't travel. Then I just kept praying and praying and praying and praying until I got to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, well done. And what was it like living in Khartoum during the fighting?
It was scary, terrifying.
But you're okay now?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Well done. Well done. And so how about you? What next for you?
We're going back to Scotland, to Edinburgh, I think. That's where I was staying. I work offshore generally, so I've been working offshore, and they were back in Sudan for the time being, but since this happened now, we're going back to Edinburgh.
What was the worst moment for you these last couple of weeks?
Just being in Khartoum during the fighting. There's a few shells that hit the house.
Your own house?
Yes. On the roof of the house, like one projectile or something hit the water tank on the roof of our neighbors and hit the roof of our house. That was really loud. Kicked off the dust and broke all the windows.
It's a close escape.
Also, yeah, a few neighbors. A girl, she was 16 years old, broke a bullet in the house, killed her.
Killed her?
Yeah. So it was a terrible time. It was really hard.
These foreign evacuations are happening more regularly now. Indeed, some countries, like Britain, are already starting to wind their operations down. But the conflict that triggered all this rages on. Sudan's two warring generals, despite agreeing to yet another ceasefire, seem determined to settle this militarily.
Andrew Harding, BBC News in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the leader of the Islamic State group has been tracked down and killed in Syria in an operation by Turkish intelligence forces. Abu Hussein al-Qurashi took over leadership of the Islamist militant group late last year after his predecessor was killed. Let's now speak to Orla Geren, who's in Izmir in Turkey. Orla, ISIS has, of course, largely lost the territory it once held. So how significant is this figure?
Well, Turkey would say it's significant, and certainly it's good timing for President Erdogan, if we can put it that way, because he is just 2 weeks from crucial elections here for President and for the Parliament. So it is very much in line with his promise in all of his campaign speeches to keep fighting terrorism. Now, this leader of IS, as you say, was quite new in the job. He only took over in November. Very little is known about him. Very little was said by IS. Simply that he was a veteran fighter and a loyal son. in the time in which he has been in charge of the organisation, he hasn't managed to deliver any messages in his own name. And in recent times, IS has adopted a strategy of keeping a lower profile for their leaders, trying to keep them alive. They lost 2 leaders in last year alone.
Orla Guerin, thank you very much indeed. The troubled US bank First Republic collapsed this morning and was immediately subjected to a takeover offer from JP Morgan Chase, according to America's banking regulator. The Californian bank is the 3rd American lender to fail this year. Here's our business correspondent Mark Ashdown.
Investors and customers have been deserting First Republic Bank. In just 2 months, its shares have tanked from $147 each to just $3.50. And $100 billion of deposits have been withdrawn. When confidence goes, money tends to follow. The US banking regulator has now brokered a multi-billion-dollar rescue deal. The investment banking giant JP Morgan Chase will take on all 84 branches, and all deposits will be guaranteed by the US government.
If you were a First Republic depositor, you can breathe a big sigh of relief today. If you were under $250,000, the US guarantee level, you didn't have to worry anyway. But if you had more than $250,000 US dollars in deposit with First Republic, as of now, you have that deposit with JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in America.
First Republic was known for having a big mortgage lending business and a large stable of wealthy clients. As interest rates soared, it was forced to borrow at higher rates and was always seen as vulnerable. It's the 3rd mid-sized US bank to collapse this year, following the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and New York-based Signature Bank.
Now, there have been fears this is the start of another financial crisis. If we look back at 2008, yes, it started with one bank, Northern Rock, but quickly spread to lots of others. Now, the issue then was weak rules around mortgage lending, and pretty much every bank was exposed. Since 2008, the rules around lending have been tightened, and banks now have to have more money in reserve to ride out difficult periods. So I think the hope now is this can be contained to a few banks, and this is the end of this recent turmoil.
If this had happened a month ago, I think there would have been substantial concerns about basically contagion, the concept that one bank is going to cause another bank to fail and runs on banks. The marketplace has settled down a good bit over the last month.
At least one more interest rate rise is predicted in the US and UK. Smaller banks then could face yet more strain. How relaxed the markets are over this rescue deal will become clear in the next few hours. Mark Ashdown, BBC News.
In France, the traditional May Day celebrations are being used for mass demonstrations against President Macron's plans to raise the pension age to 64. The plans will push through Parliament without a vote. Let's now speak to our Europe correspondent Nick Beake, who's in Paris. Nick, how significant are these demonstrations in the context of the parallel celebrations?
Well, Tanya, there is a long tradition of protest here on May Day, but as you say, it's the pension reform that's really driving the anger of people on the streets today. And it's worth reminding ourselves that this is something that's actually being forced through already. So yet people say they hope to repeal this law, which sends the retirement age up to 64. Just looking around, combination of families, people out with the kids and prams, but also people dressed all in black with rocks. And we know generally they're the people who clash with officers as this protest goes on. Just as the rain comes out, that's something that the police will be pleased about, because generally people don't tend to hang around for that long when the weather's bad. But they're setting off now. 2 questions to ask ourselves. Will there be significant violence today? We'll have to wait and see. And the second question, will this have any sort of political impact in the weeks and months to come for President Macron?
Nick Beake, thanks very much. The former US President Donald Trump has arrived in Aberdeenshire to visit his golf courses. Posting on his own social media platform, Mr. Trump said he'll be opening a new site. He also plans to go to his course in Doonbeg on Ireland's west coast. Our Scotland correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie is at Aberdeen Airport for his. So Donald Trump has already arrived.
Yes, he's arrived and he's left. He's gone to his golf course in Aberdeenshire, but I'm at Aberdeen Airport and you can probably see the Trump plane just behind me here, which landed a short time ago. This is Donald Trump's first time in the UK since 2019. It's the first time in Scotland since 2018, and his plane with the unmistakable Trump name on the side touched down at Aberdeen Airport about 2 hours ago. And even though he's no longer president, there was still huge interest in this visit, a huge media presence here at Aberdeen Airport. And he's visiting Scotland as a private individual. As you said, he's here to see his golf courses, to visit after several years, first here in Aberdeenshire, then Turnberry in Ayrshire, and then over to Ireland. Media were quite disappointed that he didn't come over and have even just a few words, but he did wave and he did mouth something, which we think he said it's great to be home. He does have an affection for Scotland. He does have family roots in Scotland. He said this was the home of my mother. His mother, Marianne MacLeod, came from Lewis in the Western Isles. So Donald Trump no longer at the airport. He's gone to his golf course and he said he's going to open a second course there in Aberdeenshire.
Alexandra, thank you very much. 4,500 hospitality venues around Britain closed their doors for good in the past year. That's around 12 a day, according to new analysis. Soaring business costs, rising prices and a decline in people's disposable incomes were among the reasons for the closures. Figures indicate smaller independent businesses have been hardest hit. Cuba's communist government has cancelled its annual May Day celebration in Havana, which marks International Workers' Day. Last year's parade was the first since the COVID pandemic in an otherwise annual tradition. The country has been grappling with severe fuel shortages, which meant people couldn't be bussed into the capital. And before we go, just time to congratulate Mark Selby, who's created a bit of sporting history as he became the first player to make a maximum 147 break in a snooker World Championship final. The four-time winner still trails Luca Grosel by 9-8, going in today's final day of action, which has just got underway at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield. And now it's time for a look at the weather. Here's Helen Willits.
Tanya, thanks very much. For parts of the south and east of England, Kent notably, we've had our wettest March and April in 90 years. It was pretty wet in many other parts of central and eastern England, but not in the northwest, just like March. We've had slightly lower than average rainfall. But today we have rainfall in the north and west in the form of showers, this weather front here, which significantly will introduce some chillier air across many parts of the UK through today and tonight. That air coming right the way down from the Arctic. So again, temperatures are likely to dip a little bit below the early May average. It will certainly feel chilly, even in the sunshine in the north today. But for most, we've got a little bit of sunshine out there, a few showers around. This was Fife just a little earlier ago. So if you're heading out for a walk, some pretty spring colours to enjoy, but do take something waterproof because we do have those showers around. Now those showers are quite evident here across central and eastern parts of England as well as across Scotland, and that's all trekking its way gradually southwards. So I think those that we currently have across parts of Wales will diminish. Good spells of sunshine, more than yesterday here across the southwest and Northern Ireland too, but perhaps a few rumbles of thunder further east, a little bit of sea fog around the Irish Sea coast. But you can see the temperatures, 17s and 18s in the south, just 5s and 6s across the Northern Isles. That's that Arctic air, which continues its journey southwards through this evening and overnight as the showers start to fade away. But under the clear skies, I think fog will be an issue in southern and western areas, even inland. A frost to beware of farmers and growers across the glens of Scotland. So it's a chilly start tomorrow morning, but at least some sunshine. And I think we'll all elsewhere, even though we start quite dull with some low cloud and some mist and fog, we will see some brightness developing. It's strong now, the May sunshine. So we'll see some brightness, a little bit of sunshine, possibly the odd spot of drizzle coming into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland later on a weather front. But notably, tomorrow's temperatures are a little lower, and that's because of that Arctic air, particularly near the east coast, just 12 or 13 degrees here. But surprisingly, some high levels of pollen, higher than today for Northern Ireland, for western and central parts of England and for Wales as well. As we go into Wednesday, it's chasing the cloud again. Lot of dry weather, really. Our weather front by that stage just brushing up through the western side of Scotland, northern Scotland, cloudier, but milder as a result. The winds are starting to come up from the south, but still a little bit nippy on the east coast. Still some generally light winds here coming in off the North Sea. What about the latter part of the week and into the important weekend? Well, it unfortunately at the moment is looking unsettled. Low pressures driving in off the Atlantic, driving in bands of showers. So we finished April with showers and we start May the same way. Tanya.
I was hoping for something more optimistic. Thank you very much indeed, Helen Willis. That's all from the BBC News at 1. So it's goodbye from me. Thanks for joining us on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are.